Hello again, it's Laura Davalo here with a couple of slider cards featuring the gorgeous Typewriter Die-namics and the new pull tab slider Die-namics. Let's start by taking a look at the Typewriter die set. There are a bunch of little pieces, but I'll explain where everything goes in a jiffy. Okay, so this first die is meant for cutting a slider channel, and we'll use it later on. This little piece goes in the middle of the larger one, which I cut in Eiffel Tower gray. Those black pieces are called roller knobs. You would turn them to insert or take out the paper. I have no idea what those gray pieces are called, but they are some kind of small rollers that allow the paper to glide. First, you could glue the body of the typewriter on top of this part. If you don't plan on adding an interactive feature, you could adhere this rectangular piece to cover the hole, but we're not going to use it today. Then we could adhere this part on top. I layered 2 to make it sturdier. There we go. I also wanted to add dimension to the keyboard, so I cut 2 layers out of black and 1 out of white cardstock. I added a piece of clear tape to the back of the last layer so that the keys won't fall out, and soon I'll show you how I assembled it with liquid glue. So this goes here, and gosh, my nails are so short that I can't grab these little pieces, and of course I can't find my tweezers. Oh, actually, before gluing this gray element, we need to adhere the carriage release lever underneath it. There. Okay, so here I'm adding tiny drops of glue behind each of the keys, and then I'm going to line up everything on top of the black layer. We can then rub it with a bone folder to make sure that everything sticks. And now we can carefully peel off the negative part of the die cut. I'm using the tip of this file to press down the keys. Oops, it looks like I missed one in the middle there, but no problem, we'll just add a little more glue and that's it. Off camera I heat embossed the typewriter text background in white on smooth white paper. You can see how the letters shine, but they aren't really visible until you hit them with some ink. I like to run a panel through the die cutting machine the least amount of times possible, so I've already adhered the largest die from the A2 stitched rectangle stack set 1 Die-namics to it with some tape, and now I'm doing the same with the channel die. I placed it about 1/4 of an inch from the lower edge. After die cutting, I usually run a nail file along the edges to get rid of any paper burr. It's a small step that makes a big difference in the neatness or elegance of a card. Okay, let's move on to panel number 2, which I already ran through my big shot with the faux stitching die. Now we need to cut a couple of slits in it so that we can add a strip of wrapping plastic or cellophane to it to move the pull tab and at the same time the typewriter's mini sheet of paper. I'm using a T-ruler to get everything as centered as possible. The lower slit is about 2 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and the upper one is 1 inch from the upper edge. The distance between them is 2 inches, and they need to be just slightly over 1/2 inch wide for our cellophane strip. Let's start decorating the panels. I used the watercolor wash freeform Die-namics to create my own stencil out of acetate. To get a good cut, I like to sandwich the acetate between 2 pieces of thin paper and put the die on top. I used Lemon Drop and Butterscotch Premium Dye inks for the yellow ink blending and Summer Splash for the blue. Any color ink will make those white letters pop. Next, we need to wrap the 1/2 inch wide and 4 1/4 inch long strip of cellophane around those slits. It's actually easier to start with a longer one and just trim it. I adhered a piece of score tape to one of the edges for a strong hold, but if you prefer it, you can also use a little stapler. I forgot to mention before that for my double slider mechanism, I cut 3 pieces of the pull tab guide out of smooth white cardstock and layered them with liquid glue. I added score tape to the back of the last piece, and now I'm carefully peeling off the backing and using the grid of my craft mat to adhere it to the back of my panel. The pull tab slider Die-namics makes creating slider cards a breeze, and you won't even need foam tape for the simpler versions. Okay, now we can adhere a piece of score tape directly to the cellophane strip, just under that upper slit. After peeling off the backing, we just need to place the pull tab in the guide and press down on the tape. Off camera, I added a couple of strips of score tape to the slider guide, as well as some foam tape to the edges of the panel, so that I can adhere the panel to the lemon drop colored card base. You can use a regular A2 card base, but I make mine a smidge larger, 8 3/4 by 5 5/8, scored at 4 3/8. Make sure that the pull tab doesn't move while you're doing this, because if it gets stuck in the adhesive, your mechanism won't work. Next, we can add another piece of score tape, this time to the lower edge of the acetate strip on the front of the card. Here's where we'll attach the typewriter paper. Off camera, I stamped one of the phrases from the Typewriter Sentiments Love Set on it with extreme black hybrid ink. I also added thin strips of foam tape to the back of the typewriter so that I can adhere it to the panel without interfering with the sliding mechanism. It's very hard to know exactly where to stamp your sentiment so that it isn't visible before pulling out the paper. I stamped both of my sentiments 1 3/8 inches from the upper edge of the mini papers, but you can always make slight adjustments like trimming the excess paper or hiding only part of the sentiment from the beginning. Okay, let's test it before we move on. Looks like everything is working as it should. The pull tab guide for my regular slider card has only 2 layers, so there's no need for foam tape. I just layered strips of leftover cardstock to add some dimension to the back of the panel. After adding glue all over, we can now adhere it to the card base of Summer Splash cardstock, which is one of my favorite colors. After inserting the pull tab in its place, I adhere the slider element to it. If you don't have one for this card, you can use a foam dot or a strip of foam tape instead. I noticed that the complete sentiment would not be visible unless I cut off a little piece of my typewriter, but it'll be totally hidden by the paper, so no harm, no foul. A final little tinkering with the typewriter to get it just right, and that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed these happy slider cards. Please give the video a thumbs up if you did. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. If you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Bye bye, hasta la próxima.